What happens when government oversight just fails so completely that billions of dollars, and I'm not talking about millions, but an estimated $9 billion in taxpayer funds just vanish?
It's almost unthinkable.
We're talking about a scale of theft so massive it has, well, it's fundamentally destabilized the government of an entire state.
And that staggering failure is what we are diving into today. Our sources here are, they're official investigations, comprehensive audit findings, and even sworn testimony from congressional inquiries.
So the real deal.
Exactly. And they all detail this catastrophic series of fraud scandals in Minnesota during the 2020s.
Yeah.
This wasn't just one bad actor or one incident.
Yeah.
It was widespread looting across multiple critical state-administered social services. We're talking about programs for child nutrition, for housing, for some of the most vulnerable people receiving autism care.
And the scope, it's just so hard to wrap your head around. The U.S. Attorney for Minnesota, along with other federal investigators, they estimate the total fraud could reach $9 billion.
Right, and that's across just 14 high-risk Medicaid programs since 2018.
If that number holds up, we're looking at more than half of all the payments made to those programs just gone, disappeared into these schemes.
It is a devastating signal of a total administrative collapse.
Yeah.
And the consequences, well, they've been immediate and they've been political. Governor Tim Walz was forced to withdraw his re-election bid on January 5th, 2026, right in the middle of this scandal blowing up.
And at the same time, you have federal agencies, Homeland Security, the FBI surging resources into the state. It turned what was a local crisis into, frankly, a national disgrace.
It did, and the federal government has reacted pretty decisively.
They had to.
The Trump administration took the pretty dramatic step of freezing federal child care payments to Minnesota. That sends a huge signal of national alarm over what really looks like state-level financial negligence on a monumental scale.
So our mission today is really to unpack this. How did the system break so completely? And, who was ultimately responsible for letting all the guardrails down?
Well, you have to start with the cases themselves, because they really established the playbook for the fraud. The most infamous one, Feeding Our Future, or FOF. That was the gateway.
Okay.
This one nonprofit claimed to be feeding hundreds of thousands of school children during the pandemic. But prosecutors found they were just fabricating meal sheets, lying about the number of kids served. It was a brazen kickback operation that ended up being $250 million in committed fraud.
$250 million. And what's really amazing about that FOF case is that the state, they knew something was wrong. And they knew it very early on.
They did. The Minnesota Department of Education, we'll just call them MDE, found major irregularities as early as 2020. They actually tried to freeze the payments.
But FOF sued them, right?
They did. And this is where you see the dynamic shift from, a simple administrative error to what looks like a culture of appeasement. MDE first claimed a judge forced them to resume the payments.
Okay, that's their defense.
But then the judge publicly rebuked that. He said, no, MDE voluntarily restarted the payments after they decided internally that the problems were resolved.
Wow. So it wasn't the judge, it was their own decision. It just speaks to this fatal lack of willingness to enforce any accountability, even when they're under pressure.
$250 million was stolen, and the agency that was supposed to be the watchdog just flinched.
So FOF basically created a successful blueprint for this kind of fraud. Did that formula then just get copied and pasted across other social programs?
Absolutely. It was like they found the weakest link. The fraud groups recognized where the state wasn't looking. Take the Housing Stabilization Services Program, HSS.
Okay, what happened there?
This program was originally supposed to cost about, $2.6 million a year? By 2024, it had exploded to over $100 million.
$100 million from $2.6 million. How does that even happen?
The sources all point to dangerously insufficient vetting, minimal guardrails and eligibility rules that were just way too easy to manipulate.
So it was an open door.
The U.S. Attorney himself called it a magnet for fraud tourists. People would literally travel from other states just to bill Minnesota for services that were never, ever rendered. They caught fraudsters, billing for dead clients, falsifying lease documents,
Dead clients,
and even outright bribing homeless people just to use their names on forms.
It sounds like the second MDE looked away in that child nutrition scandal, every other program just became fair game. What about programs for, the most vulnerable people?
It's the same pattern. You see it in the EIDBI program, which handles autism services. That program went from $1 million a year to over $220 million by 2024.
Unbelievable.
The tactics were the same. kickbacks to enroll families, fraudulent Medicaid claims for services that were either wildly inflated or completely imaginary. We saw one single provider, a woman named Asha Farhan Hassan, plead guilty to stealing $14 million herself.
The systems were just porous across the board.
Simply.
The financial scale is one thing. It's staggering. But the sheer, it's almost cartoonish audacity of some of this theft. That's what really highlights the systemic incompetence. Let's talk about the substance use disorder, the SUD fraud cases.
Okay, yeah. This is where you see billing abuses that just defy all logic. Take an organization called Evergreen Recovery. Investigators found they billed for 203 hours of services provided by a single employee in one 24-hour day.
Wait, stop. 203 hours.
Okay.
In a 24-hour day. You physically cannot do that? That goes so far beyond simple negligence, it's a failure to check, basic math. Did anyone even look at the daily totals before cutting the checks?
That is the critical question the sources raise about oversight. Or look at New Way Alliance. They got tens of millions of dollars by exploiting a loophole where any service over 30 minutes could be billed as a full hour.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Yep. So they'd provide, say, 35 minutes of service, bill for a full hour, pause for 10 minutes, and then start the 35-minute cycle all over again. They were maximizing billing with minimal delivery.
These aren't just minor mistakes. They're highly sophisticated scams targeting these fundamental weaknesses in the state's financial controls.
Right.
So if the fraud was this brazen, this repetitive, and this easy to spot, the 203-hour claims, it tells you the systemic guardrails had to have been either deliberately dismantled or were never there to begin with.
Well, if we zoom out and connect all these massive schemes, the core failure was a lack of basic accountability. Key programs like HSS and EIDBI operated without requiring providers to get a basic license to bill the state.
Wait a minute. So the state was just handing out public money, taxpayer money for housing and medical care to completely unverified, unlicensed groups. That sounds less like an oversight failure and more like a neon-lit open invitation for fraud.
That's precisely the critique, and you combine that missing license requirement with state officials relaxing the few rules they did have during the pandemic, like allowing remote billing for EIDB.
So fraudsters didn't even need a brick-and-mortar office or a reputation.
They just needed an application and a claim.
And the state just kept ignoring warnings. Our sources show that Hennepin County officials specifically warned the Department of Human Services, or DHS, multiple times in 2024 about the HSS fraud. They even flagged specific fraudulent providers.
But despite those specific documented warnings from local officials, the people on the ground DHS just kept paying those flagged providers at the state level. The bureaucracy was either moving way too slowly or
winningly ignoring the signs.
Right.
Which seems to be confirmed by the just astonishing public statements from their leadership. Even as all this evidence was piling up, DHS Commissioner Jody Harpstead asserted in January 2025 that there was no widespread fraud. She even claimed fraudsters didn't dare try it.
Didn't dare try. That level of bureaucratic denial just let the theft accelerate. It shows this internal culture that was more worried about shielding itself from criticism than, protecting public funds.
And that gets us to a really critical finding from the state's legislative auditor, that the fraud wasn't just ignored, the pursuit of it was actively discouraged because of political considerations.
That's a huge point. The auditor found that in the Feeding Our Future case, the nonprofit's threats to accuse the Department of Education of racism, that it affected the agency's judgment. It affected their willingness to shut the whole scheme down.
That just raises this incredibly uncomfortable question of how political issues were allowed to trump basic fiscal accountability.
Well, an investigator specifically said the Walz administration was reluctant to pursue the fraud allegations because they were concerned about being portrayed as racist. When a state agency is more worried about optics than about stopping millions of dollars from being stolen, the fraudsters win.
And it wasn't until the whole scandal was undeniable, the FBI was already involved, that Governor Walz finally admitted in January 2025 that his administration had a culture of being a little too trusting.
Which is quite the euphemism for a multi-billion-dollar policy failure.
To say the least. And that reluctance, that trusting culture, it wasn't happening in a political vacuum, was it? The sources document a pretty clear pattern of political ties benefiting these exact groups.
They do. Detail that network for us.
Well, for example, you see Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison meeting with FOF participants back in 2021. And according to the documents, he agreed with their allegations that the state agencies were racially discriminating against East African contractors.
And he pledged to them that, and I'm quoting here, We are in the middle of the battle with the agencies now.
So let me get this straight. The state's top law enforcement official was meeting with the very groups later accused of being the architects of the largest COVID fraud scheme in the entire country.
Yes.
And he was signaling solidarity with them against the state agencies trying to investigate them.
It's a bad look, to put it mildly. And what's more, State Senator Omar Fateh praised FOF and was later accused by a trial witness of calling A.G. Ellison to interfere directly with MDE's investigation.
Wow.
You also see the Minneapolis mayor, Jacob Free, meeting with MDE to push for funding resumption for these groups, and he was using talking points that were actually prepared by FOS leadership. The connections were deep, and they were very highly placed.
And of course, the money flowed right back into the political system. The governor himself got nearly $10,000 in campaign contributions from supporters connected to some of these Somali-operated daycare centers, many of which were central to these fraud schemes.
So this wasn't just some administrative failure. The money was going right back into the political machine.
Which is exactly why the U.S. House Oversight Committee launched an investigation in January 2026. They demanded all the documents from the Walz administration about what they knew, when they knew it, and any actions they took to maybe limit or delay the investigation.
And during that January 7th hearing, a Minnesota GOP representative just laid the blame squarely at the top. He alleged that Walz and his administration willfully turned a blind eye to crime and even retaliated against the whistleblowers.
But that hearing also really exposed the political polarization here, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. While Republicans were focused on the evidence and the failures of the DFL-controlled administration, some House Democrats spent their time criticizing former President Trump, arguing about his alleged fraud, instead of addressing the billions stolen in Minnesota.
So it's hard to get bipartisan accountability when partisan politics just takes over the room.
Exactly. And you saw that same tension in the legislative funding fights just this January. Representative Ilhan Omar requested a $1 million earmark for a Somali-led organization called Generation Hope.
And what happened with that?
House appropriators plan to immediately strike that earmark from the funding package. They said its presence threatened to tank the shutdown-preventing bill completely.
And Republican Representative Chip Roy, he praised the removal, calling earmarks the currency of corruption.
The currency of corruption. I mean, that phrase really synthesizes all the systemic issues we've been unpacking, doesn't it?
It really does. It wasn't just a few criminal masterminds. It was this perfect storm of lax rules, no licenses needed, state agencies that deliberately ignored warnings, and then political interference that either shut down or delayed investigations into specific political allies.
And the final price tag. It's a potential $9 billion theft from the most critical social services we have, programs designed to help the vulnerable. The result is just this complete erosion of public trust, the political humiliation of an entire administration, and ultimately the resignation of a sitting governor.
The system failure was rooted in bureaucratic incompetence and a political culture that really prioritized sensitivity and its own political alliances over just basic, essential fiscal accountability. So here's the final thought. If a single state's social programs for the most vulnerable citizens, can hemorrhage an estimated $9 billion of our money due to this alleged lack of oversight and political obstruction, what does that say about the security of any government spending?
That's the real question. I mean, the true cost of this scandal isn't just the dollars that were stolen. It's a profound erosion of confidence in the government's ability to manage public funds responsibly at all.
Think about the transparency issue. Representative Ilhan Omar herself condemned the defense spending bill in July 2025 for a lack of transparency, pointing out the Pentagon's failed to pass an audit since 2018.
So if Minnesota's social programs can lose $9 billion in just a few years, what confidence can we really have in any government agency that fails to provide basic financial transparency and accountability? That's the lesson Minnesota has paid billions and billions of dollars to teach the rest of the country.